Well, good evening. My name is Claire Bishop, and as Executive Director at American Public Square, it is my privilege to welcome you to tonight's event. In just a moment, we will be hearing from an impressive panel of experts to unpack the current state of U.S.-Iranian relations. But before we get started, I have just a few brief remarks. First, I want to express appreciation to our partners, International Relations Council, or IRC for short. When APS board member Azzie Amani, a panelist tonight who is herself Iranian, inquired about hosting a program on this very timely topic, it was a natural choice to reach out to our friends at the IRC to partner on it. IRC's extensive international knowledge and network, combined with APS's format and commitment to exploring complex issues with civility, facts, and perspective, is a perfect fit for a topic such as this, loaded with complexity and emotion. We are grateful to the folks at IRC for jumping in on this feet first, as they say, to bring the community a well-rounded and informative discussion. Thank you also to the Kansas City Public Library for hosting us in their beautiful and accessible space tonight. Many of you know that both IRC and APS are member-supported organizations. To those of you who are members of either or both of our organizations, thank you. Your support actively underwrites events such as this that are free and open to the public. A quick note about upcoming programming. During the summer, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country, American Public Square is planning opportunities to explore our shared history, assess our current state, and look forward together. I'm especially excited to share that on June 18th, APS will be hosting Self-Evident Truths, Grading the Declaration of Independence's Legacy at 250. This event will be held at Yardley Hall at Johnson County Community College. It features an absolutely stellar panel, including historian and author Akil Abar, Dr. Lindsay Shervinsky at the George Washington Presidential Library, and Yuval Levin of the American Enterprise Institute, who will be grading how we live up to our ideals 250 years later. Tickets are free, and more information and registration can be found at our website, americanpublicsquare.org. Finally, a couple of quick notes on the program format for this evening. In order to keep things running smoothly, we will be using APS's Civility Toolkit. We ask that, except for the beginning and end of the program, you refrain from clapping. As our founder, Ambassador Alan Katz, is fond of saying, if you hear something that you agree with, you can nod your head like this. And if you hear something that you wildly disagree with, it goes like that. That keeps us focused on the conversation, and oftentimes clapping and yelling and things like that can be a distraction to our fantastic panel. Dan Fitzpatrick from the IRC is going to be our roving reporter for tonight. We encourage you to submit audience questions by writing them down on this card. If you don't have one, you can raise your hand and someone will make sure to bring one along with a writing utensil over to you. If you've written your card or your question down on the card, just hold it up and someone will come around to collect it and furnish it to the roving reporter. And Dan will curate your questions for the panel. We'll do our very best to get to as many of your audience questions as we can. Alan Rostron of the UMKC Law School, along with a couple of his students, are live fact checkers for tonight. Fact checks can be submitted in the same way as questions. It's just on the other side of the card. So you got questions on one side, fact checks on the other. And then lastly, we do have something called a civility bell, and I got one up here just so I could demonstrate. That's how it sounds. These bells simply serve as a reminder that if the conversation gets too heated, the bell may ring and signifies that everyone could take a beat, rest, and continue the conversation after settling down. These are going to be placed kind of sporadically throughout the audience. So if you hear the conversation getting heated and feel the bell needs to be rung, by all means, please do. And I should say, it's been a while since we've had a bell rung on our panel. So we don't anticipate it tonight. Oftentimes, most frequently, bell actually gets rung on audience members. So if you're clapping, if you're shouting, if you're doing something like that, bell might ring on you too, so be aware. With that, all of those details and rules out of the way, it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Executive Director at the IRC, Evan Verplu, who will introduce our distinguished moderator and our panelists for the evening.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening. It's my distinct pleasure to be here to present you all to this program and to introduce this very illustrious panel. And I'm going to start by introducing our moderator for this evening, who is here on my left. Dr. Alan Holloman is Professor of Political Science at William Jewell College. Dr. Holloman received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from the University of Arkansas, an MA degree in Political Science from The Ohio State University, MA in Russian and East European Studies, and a PhD from Political Science at KU. His special interests include comparative politics in Russia and other post-communist states, European integration in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and American politics. Next to my left is Mona Yacoubian, who is the Director and Senior Advisor of the Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She has more than 30 years of experience working in the Middle East and North Africa with a focus on conflict analysis, governance, and stabilization challenges, and conflict prevention. She was previously Vice President of the Middle East and North Africa Center at the United States Institute of Peace, where she managed field programming in Iraq, Libya, and Tunisia, as well as Washington, D.C.-based staff. Moving on is retired Colonel Frank Klimas, who is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Joint, Interagency, and Multinational Operations at the United States Army Command and General Staff College. Colonel Klimas served as Air Force Foreign Affairs Officer for the Middle East and North Africa, and he previously worked at the American Embassy in Rabat, Morocco as a Security Cooperation Officer conducting military engagement activities with the Royal Moroccan Air Force. He's traveled throughout the Middle East as a diplomat and as a military aviator, and he served as the commander of the 505th Command and Control Wing, Detachment 1 at Fort Leavenworth. And then finally, we have Azzie Amani, who was born in Tehran, Iran during the peak of the Iran and Iraq War in the late 1980s, immigrated with her family to the U.S., where they settled in Kansas. Azzie's education covers a BA in Human Biology and an MA in Journalism and Mass Communications from the University of Kansas. Azzie has built a 20-plus year career at the intersection of communication and media strategy. And from New York to Los Angeles to the Midwest, she has guided national and global clients with clarity, insight, and vision. Today, she serves as a SVP, Strategic Director in the biotech industry, offering a bold, globally informed lens to everything she leads. So I'd first like to introduce Mona Yacoubian up to the stage, who will kick us off with some opening remarks. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Evan, and good evening. Thanks to IRC and APS for inviting me, and thank you all for coming this evening for what I hope will be an informative discussion. So you don't know this, but you're guinea pigs. I'm going to try something new tonight. The organization where I work, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, we are embarking on a new program looking at how the American heartland views U.S. foreign policy, because we feel it is essential for us to get out of the echo chamber that we live in Washington, D.C., and gain a much better understanding of how Americans across the country think about U.S. foreign policy, how it impacts them, what their aspirations are for the U.S. engagement in the world. So we're going to try something, for me, very new. It's called a Mentimeter. And I would ask that if you have a cell phone, you can take part in this survey. You can scan the QR code, and you should then see a survey, I believe, coming down on your phone. I'm seeing numbers of people joining. I will say that this is truly the first time we're trying this, but I and a number of my colleagues are going to be fanning out across the country, giving talks like this, and starting with exactly this survey with these questions. And what we hope to do is collate and bring in a lot of data from around the country and see what we can learn from it. And I think hopefully come together, we'll do what think tanks do, which is we'll perhaps produce a report or we'll have an event. But I think most importantly, I hope what it does is in this dialogue informs us, helps us to do our work better and to understand better what is important to you. So let me, with that, hopefully as many people as are interested in taking the survey have scanned the QR code, and I'm going to proceed. Now, you should be able to see this, I believe, on your screen, and you can simply answer it. And then once I see that we have enough folks answering, we'll move to the next question. Just give everybody a few moments here. This one should be pretty fast. Okay. I'm gonna give it, I don't see everybody yet, but I'm gonna give it a couple minutes. Okay. That would be me as well. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Okay, that's where we are in terms of answers. Next is age. So obviously, we're just gathering some demographic information so that we understand who's in our audience. All right. Wow. Okay. That's actually, I'm so heartened to see the 2030 up where it is. That's awesome. Last sort of demographic, and then we're going to get into the substance, into the meat of the questions. Okay. Okay. Now we get into the meat of the questions. And I think these are fairly self-explanatory, but we're trying to understand your feeling about how much developments outside the United States impact you and your neighbors. And you can see the potential answers there that you can choose. You obviously select just one. A great deal, a fair amount, not very much, not at all, no opinion. Okay, well, that's pretty important right there. Already think a great deal. Is it important that the United States play a leading role in global affairs? And again, pick one. Okay, so it is. It's important. If you believe that the United States should play a leading role in global affairs, which region is most important to U.S. interests? Really interested to see what this one is. And again, just pick one. Okay, wow. Fascinating. So Asia. I don't know if that's because of the Trump-Xi summit, which is happening as we speak, but that's really interesting. Okay. Does the United States play a stabilizing role in the world? That is a straight question. Okay, well, that one's somewhat definitive as well, okay? How important are allies and partners to the United States? Wow, pretty definitive. Okay. Last question. Use one word to describe what you think the U.S. role in the world should be. So this one is open-ended. You just type in a word. All right. There's the word cloud. So representing the words which received them, which appeared the most, leader, clearly, but I also see peacemaker, peace, collaborative, stabilizer. Okay, thank you all so much for participating in this. We will report back as we do more of these across the country and share the results. I appreciate your taking part in it. So let me be actually brief on my remarks because I think I've taken a bit of time. I'd like to do just two things right now, and we're going to pivot to the war with Iran. And I'd like to first just provide an update on where things stand, and then just speculate for a few moments on what does the region look like after this war ends, because of course it will at some point end. Today marks the 75th day of the conflict with Iran, and the war is at an impasse. There is a shaky ceasefire in place, but there was an exchange of proposals earlier in the week that yielded no real progress on the diplomatic front, and it is my guess that this impasse will remain, certainly through the duration of the current Trump-Xi summit taking place in China. In particular, I would highlight that the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz remains pretty much at a standstill as a result of a double blockade. Iran impeding the passage of most ships attempting to pass through the strait, and the U.S. blockading Iranian ports and ships bound for Iran or from Iran. We're seeing tensions remain high. We're seeing very pitched rhetoric and signaling even of an intent perhaps to fall back into conflict. There is a second front in this war that doesn't receive as much attention, but it is just as frightening, and that is in Lebanon, where the ceasefire there is rapidly unraveling. Most importantly, I would highlight that the U.S. and Iran remain very far apart, at least on paper. And I think we are engaged in or watching a battle of wills. Just to give you a sense, the United States sent Iran a 14-point memorandum of understanding about a week or so ago. And that memorandum put out really 4 key ideas. This is the U.S. position. One, that there would be a 30-day ceasefire, while a broader set of negotiations would take place. Second, that Iran would commit to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment for a period of 12 to 15 years. Third, the U.S. would agree to lift sanctions and release billions of dollars in frozen Iranian assets. And fourth, both sides would end restrictions on traffic going through the Strait of Hormuz, so the strait would be opened. That's the U.S. position. Iran today responded with 5 preconditions before it would agree to come to the negotiating table. So this is before coming to the table, 5 preconditions. 1, end all wars permanently, including in Lebanon. 2, lift the sanctions. 3, unfreeze Iranian assets. 4, pay war reparations to Iran for damage inflicted. And 5, accept Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. So you can see there's a little bit of overlap, but there's significant difference. And that's where we are. And the question is, how do we bridge that difference? Or, if we're in a battle of wills, who blinks first? And I think the way to think about it really is, in my view anyway, which side has the higher threshold for pain? Which side is suffering more? In the case of Iran, Iran has sustained significant economic and physical damage. $270 billion is a low-end estimate of what reconstruction will cost in Iran. 2 million Iranians have lost their jobs. Inflation is at 70%. The Iranian rial is at its lowest value, has depreciated significantly. And most importantly, because of this blockade, Iran cannot export its oil, which is a primary source of income, but also they have a challenge because there's nowhere for them to store the oil, or there's concern, the Iranians would have concern, that their ability to store the oil, which has to keep flowing, will be soon fulfilled, and they will not be able to. They won't know what to. They will sort of damage their oil infrastructure. However, so that's on the side of the ledger that would suggest perhaps Iran will relent. On the other side of the ledger, this is a brutal regime with no regard for its people. And so people unemployed, high unemployment, high inflation rates, et cetera, not going to move the needle so much with this regime. We also know that there's intelligence reporting that suggests that despite all of the military action taken against Iran, despite all of the, I think, 20,000 strikes, there is reporting from our intelligence community that Iran retains 70% of its ballistic missiles. So it still retains a pretty significant ballistic missile capability. And lastly, and I'll talk about this again in a moment, Iran has found an incredible source of leverage. It's de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz. And it is going to be very, very, very reluctant to relinquish that control, which is a core demand by not just the United States, by the international community. Let's turn to the U.S. now. For the U.S., on the plus side of the ledger, we have perhaps the most powerful and sophisticated military in the world. And we have launched, I think it's 20,000 strikes, together with the Israelis on targets all across Iran, targeting leadership, targeting various infrastructure, targeting ballistic missile capability, retargeting nuclear facilities as well. However, on the negative side of the ledger, domestic pressures here at home. As you all know, we are in a midterm election year, less than 6 months from the November elections, and polling is showing that this is one of the most unpopular wars in recent memories. Gas prices are high, and the longer the war endures, could keep rising. We could see, for example, a Memorial Day weekend in which gas prices hit $5 a gallon, which, as we all know, heralding the summer with that level of fuel prices at the tank is going to be, at the pump, is going to be very significant pain for Americans. Jet fuel prices have risen, and we've already seen, I would argue, the first casualty of this war, which is Spirit Airlines declaring finally and completely itself bankrupt, largely because the straw that broke the camel's back, it was a struggling company, are these high jet fuel prices that the company simply could not sustain. And of course, diesel prices are also high, and that has several knock-on effects, whether for farmers, for transportation, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it in terms of inflation. So inflation last month in April rose to 3.8%. That is the fastest acceleration and highest level of inflation since May of 2023. At the same time, real wages have fallen. So there's your affordability gap right there. And of course, war is expensive. The Pentagon has recently estimated that the cost of this war so far is $29 billion. There are independent and outside experts who say it could be far more than that. And so, you know, I think the question is, again, how does this balance work out? If we're toe-to-toe with the Iranians, who is going to blink first, or what will happen? And here I would just sort of flag for you, I think if the United States chooses to undertake military strikes, again, as a way of pressuring or coercing Iran back to the negotiating table, I would say keep your eyes on Friday and Saturday of this weekend, because the president will have concluded the summit in Beijing. And we know in general that when we undertake these new military initiatives, often it is on a Friday night. Markets are closed. And so I'm really serious, because I'm planning on travel to the region, and I am actually waiting until Saturday night to go to the Gulf, because let me wait and see what happens on Friday night. I could well be wrong. And in fact, this is such an unpredictable war. But I do think that is something to keep our eyes on. Okay, let me just conclude very quickly, because I think I've taken more time than I should, on just a couple of points about, so what happens when this war ends? Because it will end. And here what I want to leave you with is that we are in a new normal, that there really is no return to the status quo ante. Iran has discovered something through its asymmetric capabilities, through the use of drones and ballistic missiles, its ability to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz at will. And I have a very hard time seeing how we go back to the situation as it was before. That has enormous implications, not just for the region, but for global markets. I think what Iran has done in disrupting the Strait is it has happened upon a lever that it has long sought. And I think that this de facto control is important to Iran for 3 reasons. One, it provides potentially deterrence to forestall future attacks, whether by Israel or by the United States. And we can unpack this in the Q&A. Second is leverage. It is bringing this to the bargaining table, and it does now have enormous leverage by virtue of this de facto control. And third is power projection, because it is seeking to both monetize and institutionalize its control, and essentially lay its claim to its place in the Middle East. And that will be the final point I'll make, which is that, in my view, the Middle East is at what I call a hinge moment. And this is something I've been working on for a few years, so it's not so much a moment as an interregnum. It is a period where we are witnessing the receding of an old order, an order that I would say we could date back for 70 years, that really harkens to a time of American predominance in the region. And again, happy to talk more about this. That order is receding, and a new order is emerging in the Middle East. This was the case prior to the war with Iran, and I would argue the war with Iran is simply accelerating and deepening the effects of this emerging order. And we are seeing key stakeholders in the region, namely Iran on the one hand and Israel on the other. Israel through conventional military force, Iran with asymmetric military capabilities, battling to shape the contours of an emerging Middle East. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Wow. So, Mona, that was like, you did the coolest thing ever with your media up there, and that came off so cool. I'm just the college professor that comes off with like a slide. And I didn't even bring the slide. Evan made the slide for me. I mean, okay, well, you heard my bio. I'll be quick. So I'll tell you what I got out of that, the data presentation that Mona showed just a few minutes ago. And that is what I often say about American foreign policy, is that the voter, that the most casual voter even, determines the foreign policy of the world. And if you think by extension that the President of the United States is the single most influential person in world affairs, arguable, but I think you'll find the President carries a lot of weight. The President is not elected by the people of the world. The President of the United States is elected by the people of the United States. The President is elected based on domestic issues, yet has so much effect in world affairs. So I'm really happy to see all of you here tonight to take part in a dialogue of citizens about the foreign policy of the United States. I think it's very important to really understand what's at stake. Now, I've been a professor, assistant professor up at Fort Leavenworth for a little over 5 years, and I'll just tell you about those students. It's a very unique kind of graduate school experience. We have about 1,000 to 1,200 students every year. It's a 10-month course, so every year it's a new cycle. And it's pretty much taking the midpoint of an officer's career, Army officer's career, and we get them ready. They get there, the midpoint is 10 years, and then we get them ready for the next 10 years. We teach them all kinds of things about operational art and strategy, and how to run the military, how to lead. But, we have not just Army, but also there are some officers from the Air Force and the Navy and the Marines and even the Coast Guard. And we have international officers, too. We have about 10% who come from other countries. And that's the best part of what I teach. So I teach strategy, operational art, operational planning. I also teach joint targeting. And I teach Middle Eastern strategic and regional studies. And in my classes, I have a good portion of students from the region, and I'm very grateful to have the perspectives. I have a very multifaceted, very complex perspective on everything going on in the region. So I'd like to share a couple of those things for you and put it in a lens as a policy guy. I'm not a historian, I'm a policy guy. I think the first thing I want to make sure I let you know is my comments are my own and may not reflect the views of the Command and General Staff College, the Army, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Okay, fight's on. All right, yeah, I worked in the American Embassy in Rabat, Morocco for a couple of years, and I briefly worked at a couple of other embassies. So I've seen the way that the sausage of foreign policy is made. I kind of understand that. Now, we kind of got into being a foreign area officer in the military by mistake, I hit a point in my career, I wanted to do something a little different, I wanted to do something bigger than myself, and I volunteered to take the language test. And I didn't speak any foreign languages. And turns out I was really good at languages. I didn't even know that. I took this test, it's a made-up language, you take it and they assign you a language based on your score. And, you know, this was around 2008, 9, and I had been deployed many, many times to the Middle East by this time. And I found out that my high score got me Arabic. And I was like, oh my gosh. So they didn't need to tell me where my region was going to be after that. I just knew. And so being a FAO, a foreign area officer, is a leap of faith. You don't know what you're doing until you kind of get into it. But I'll tell you what, I love it. And I follow the Middle East like it's a sport. It's the passionate thing I do when I get ready and teach my classes on the Middle East. Now, one thing that, like I said, I'm not a historian, I'm a policy guy, but I will tell you that the United States has a lot of interest in not just the Middle East, but in Iran. Not just for the last 43, 47, 50 years. I'd say going all the way back to Truman. There are three main interests that drive U.S. policy in the Middle East since World War II. Ensuring the free flow of oil from the Gulf. Number two is guaranteeing the survival and security of Israel. And number three, limiting the influence of the Soviet Union. Now, we have run out of Soviet Unions, so we've figured out a way to instead substitute that boogeyman for terrorism for the USSR. Then it was weapons of mass destruction for the USSR. And then it was China and Russia in the region for the USSR, and now it's Iran for USSR. Now, that doesn't mean that Iran is not a main issue for U.S. interests. It is. But the last one threatens all the others. Now, the two main sources of conflict in the region, from my perspective, is Israel and Iran. And we can talk about all the recent conflicts in the modern Middle East, and I think you'll see it kind of goes back to that. Now, the U.S. policy history shows the interest to force Iran specifically into U.S. influence or control since before nuclear weapons were a problem. And so if we go back and we talk about before the 2015 JCPOA, before we went back into 2006 and just started talking about nuclear weapons in Iran, we go all the way back to Reagan during the Iran-Iraq War. We go all the way back to Carter. Nobody was talking about Iran having nuclear weapons back then, yet that seemed to be a problem in the American interest. And we can go all the way back to Eisenhower in the 1953 coup to remove Prime Minister Mossadegh and reinstall the Shah. And we can talk about the influences there. And that all goes back to the importance of oil. We can talk about all the different doctrines that frame that as well. We'll get into that. But the U.S. has been trying to pivot recently out of the Middle East and into the Pacific for more than 10 years, since I think President Obama said it in 2012. But I'll tell you that the Middle East is the single most strategic place in the world that we cannot pull ourselves out of. And I don't think the U.S. is serious about committing any attention to the Indo-Pacific. And all you have to do is follow the money. Look at the policy, look at the money. It does not go into a cohesive or believable either military strategy for the Indo-Pacific or in policy. The current conflict was not inevitable, nor was it necessary. But I will tell you that the closing of the Strait of Hormuz was not only predictable, it was predicted. It's been predicted in all assessments of war plans for at least 40 years. Now, the real problem is not just petroleum and petroproducts. The bigger problem is definitely maybe tenfold. So this is just one of many problems in the Middle East. It's not the only problem, and I would say that there are more problems that are bigger than what is currently going on. But right now, we have the outcome is going to be bigger food insecurity and scarcity in the most vulnerable areas due to the lack of fertilizer moving through. And okay, if we opened up the strait tomorrow, we still have a problem. Farmers are planting now. Now, the military objectives, we keep hearing about this, about strategy and military objectives. And I will say this, I'll stand on the stage and I will defend the United States military. And I will say they have not lost a war on their military objectives. They have not lost a war on the efforts of the military. What we have failed at is strategy and connecting those military end states to strategic ends. I just happen to teach a little bit about strategy, so we can have a little talk about that. But what we have not done is we have not assessed a strategy that's sustainable, that's acceptable, or that's feasible. Now, I think that overall, I'm going to be charitable here and say that the president has miscalculated. I think that the loser decides when the war is over, not the winner. And I would have to say that had the president fully understood what he was getting into, he would have gone to Congress and asked for an authorization for the use of military force, because war requires commitment of the entire nation. And if we're not at war, we're certainly committing acts of war. Now, he did not connect the objectives to a strategy or resources, and he expected a quick win. And I have to tell you that his success in Venezuela may have paved the way to where we are in Iraq, in Iran today. And if we go back just a few months, or not even quite a year, we look at Operation Midnight Hammer, which was a success. We call it some call it 12-day war. I call it the 40-minute war. That was really just 40 minutes our B-2s were over Iran, not 12 days. And I got to tell you, although there is a summit going on right now between President Trump and Xi Jinping, China's not going to come to the aid of the United States in this. What would have been necessary is not only an address by the president to Congress and an appeal to the people of the United States in order to lay out what the plans were and what the actual strategic objectives were, but as you said yourself in this poll over here, you said that partnerships, that your partners and allies are important when a nation is going to war, when a nation is enduring great challenges. And I don't think we did that. And I know that the president didn't do that, and as evidenced by the fact that no European nation wants to help us in the Strait of Hormuz. And with that, I'll just end this by saying the conflict right now is not going great, but it doesn't mean that all is lost. Unfortunately, I think that the message you're going to get is that everything will be okay, because the president does in fact believe everything is just going to turn out okay. So I think we have the hard work ahead of us to work with partners in the region to get an end to this. And I think we're starting to see the nations in the region doing that as we speak. We're starting to see UAE and even Saudi and Kuwait start to leverage attacks against Iran. So I'll close my comments there, and we can pick it up where we left off. And thank you all for coming.
Okay, I have to balance between wearing glasses for close-up or looking there. So I am going to focus there. First of all, I wanted to thank everybody who took the time to come in today. I appreciate you. I'm Azzie. My name is actually Azadeh. It means freedom. I was born in 1978 when Iran's revolution happened. And during the Iran-Iraq War, as mentioned earlier, we immigrated to Germany. I had to learn how to speak German there, and then we immigrated to Kansas. It's a whole long story why Kansas. But I'm very glad that I ended up in Kansas, because then I also experienced New York and LA, and something brought me back here for obvious reasons that I think you all may agree with. But I am not going to talk about policy, what's going to happen, what's not going to happen in these few minutes. What I want to do is paint a picture in your mind about what Iran is going through. I go back to Iran very frequently. I have a business there. I imported the first fair trade saffron. I work with people who are farmers in Iran all the way to people who are multimillionaires in Iran. So I have a lens to a wide range of folks on the ground, and whenever I'm there and I'm visiting, I love talking to the taxi drivers, I love talking to the store clerks to get a sense of what is it that people are feeling. And every time that I go back to Iran, it is mind-blowing how much has changed, how much the people have grown, especially with social media, how much people have learned, how much they've regained their strength to speak up. And it all really started in 2009. And that was when we had the Green Movement, and the Green Movement was the first movement that really broke the walls of fear. So I'm going to put that in your mind, and we're going to start some slides. And I know we tapped into World War II, but I'm going to actually take you back to around World War I. The slides that we're going to be presenting, can it be projected? Is it possible you guys can do the sliding? Perfect, thank you. So what I want to do is I want to paint a picture for you. There are three big phases in Iran. It is the beginning of Iran's constitutional revolution. I'm going to tap into. My slides are dense, but you don't need to read all of this. If you want this, I will email it to you. I'd be happy to do that. But I just want to paint a picture for you that there were three phases in Iran. We often talk about it in 1979 or 1953 coup. That was just reference. But I'd like to take you back to around World War I. We had the Qajar dynasty, then we had the Pahlavi dynasty, and now we have the Islamic Republic revolution. The Qajar dynasty basically was tangled up with a lot of corruption, with a lot of mismanagement. It was a mess. So at that time, which I will tap into shortly, there were a lot of interferences happening from UK, from Russia. It's a pattern that you're going to see all the way up to today in the Middle East. So yes, Middle East is a very important region. So you have the Qajar dynasty. There were heavy taxes, corruption, and foreign concessions, foreign interference, rise of modern ideas. That's when it started bubbling up to the top. And ultimately, what happened during the Qajar dynasty, people rose up and they pushed for a constitutional revolution. 1906 is when it happened. Iran is the first Muslim majority nation that successfully was able to manage that. The Ottomans tried it before, but it didn't fall through. And why do we say it was a success with Iran? It's because they were actually able to form a majlis, which means a parliament. This is really important to keep in mind because this constitutional revolution is in the collective psyche of all Iranians that you see, and it is part of the fight that you are seeing today from inside of Iran. Can we go to the next slide? So Iran, yes, has always been exploited by foreign interferences, but it matters who it was. Back in the days, back in the early 20th century, it was really the Brits and the Russians. They decided to decide Iran without talking to Iranians, or divide Iran without talking to Iranians. So this interference from European nations and Russia is still playing those games that you're seeing today, except we now have China in the formula as well. All the way up to 1953, CIA and M16 supported coup. UK had a lot of influence here. I know when you read the news bites, it's always about, the CIA did this, the CIA did that, but really UK had a huge influence on this, and I will put a lot of the weight on that. So we had Mohammad Mossadegh, who was appointed as prime minister in the parliament. He had noble causes wanting to nationalize Iran's oil. That is important, and it is valid. But it is also important to note the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. it is also important to note that before he was appointed to this position, what had happened is the former prime minister was actually assassinated by an Islamist. And that Islamist was put in jail. Prime Minister Mossadegh gets positioned by the Shah of Iran. In his efforts to nationalize Iran's oil, and the difference between the gentleman that was assassinated is that Iran wasn't equipped with all the resources and the experts to make sure that when you nationalize the oil, you can manage it as well. So while the cause was noble, the implementation had a lot of flaws. And that led to him actually defying the constitutional limits, because Iran in 1906 was fighting for law and order. You cannot have a country without law and order that defends the rights of the people and prioritizes them over an absolute monarchy or an absolute government or a theocracy or whatever it may be. He aligned with the clerics for political gain. He pardoned the assassin, which really normalized violence as a way to get to your means. And he contributed to fueling of instability. So in the news, you will always hear 1953 coup, we're always interfering, that led to this, that led to that. Actually, there was always a battle between the Islamist clerics and the people who wanted to establish a constitutional republic in Iran. The clerics basically want to bring in the Sharia, and the constitutionalists want to bring in what you experience here in the United States. So let's go to the next slide. And it can't be any more clear with the protests that you're seeing these days. It cannot be more clear. If you see an Iranian holding the flag all the way to that side, that is a person who is aligned with the Islamic Republic or sympathizes with them in some shape or form, or is an anti-Western ideology or perspective. An anti-Western ideology from the current regime of Iran is their identity. And that is deteriorating, because most Iranians in Iran that you engage with, that is not what they stand for. In second grade, they laid out the American flag for me to stomp on, to walk over. I jumped over it because I knew one day we were going to come over here. And as a kid, I felt and knew that stepping on the American flag meant stepping on people I don't know. I don't think we should underestimate the humanity of people. I think there's so much that's being forced onto people inside of Iran that I think it's a mispresentation with the fact that there is no freedom of speech in Iran. Currently, the internet is fully shut down. How are we supposed to hear what the Iranians want? So when we say Iran, we're talking about the Islamic Republic, not the nation. This is an important distinction, and you will hear many Iranians, just like I did, clarify that for you. Iran doesn't equal to Islamic Republic. Iran is me, my mom, my friend, all the people that I engage with. It is the people that make up the nation. Islamic Republic is a security fanatic government that has hijacked our country. This flag goes all the way back to the beginning that I presented to you in 1906. That's the flag we were using back then. And this resembles continuation of the 1906 Constitution. So when you see people establishing or raising this flag, you basically know that they are either a monarchist, or constitutional monarchist, or constitutional Republican. That's the distinction that I want to make sure I put in your thoughts as you process all these informations coming at you at once, because it's a lot. And Iran is not sound bites. Iran is a civilization of over 3,000. I'm just really reducing it to 3,000, but it's a lot older than that. And I think we can't remember the human side of it. Let's go to the next slide. This is the Iranians I know. I am the Iranian that you will see in Iran when you get to come to visit, and I can't wait for that day to happen. They are very progressive. They are very liberal. They are savvy. They are educated. Over 75% of Iranians' population is under 38 years. Majority of that population that is educated is 75% of them, and majority of the 75% are women who are educated. So Iran is equipped for freedom and liberty and to maintain a constitutional republic. So this is who you see, very active people fighting for human rights, fighting for equal rights, literally risking their lives to do it. I was in Iran last January of 24, and I myself was sitting in a car and my hijab fell, and I got a fine for it. And it's interesting because they can track you in your car through your license plate, but if you're walking outside, you don't have a tracker. So what happens is people wear the hijab in the car. When they get out, they take it off, and that's their defiance. And so inside of Iran, you have millions of Rosa Parks, and I just don't feel like their voices are being heard right now, especially with the internet shutdown. Let's go to the next slide. So the pressure building inside Iran. I appreciate the presentation that we had today. I think, I'm going to probably just quickly go over this because Mona did a great job of articulating what's happening in Iran. But I did want to add to it. I think there was a piece that was missing. It's the generational shift that you're seeing in Iran. Iran protests that you're saying, it's not just we want a better economy, we want this. It's an ultimate rejection of the Islamic Republic, which is founded in Velayat Faqih, which means a supreme leader. And the supreme leader was killed. That's why you saw people in the protests on the streets thanking Donald Trump. And it's not when Iranians are thanking Donald Trump, it's not that they're saying we're fully aligned with you. Iranians are not dumb. Iranians know this regime better than anybody outside of Iran, better than Donald Trump, I would say. However, what they do recognize is that there is this confluence of things happening on a global level from China, from Russia, from United States, from Israel, from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, from the Houthis. It's the entire Middle East, and there's a global balance of powers happening between the great powers, which if you go to the United Nations, they're also there. Hence why nothing ever gets done at the United Nations because of the veto powers of China and Russia. And then you have the US and the rest of the folks that just offset it. That's why human rights violations inside of Iran never gets addressed. Honestly, when I was a kid, I always wanted people to know about Iran, but I just really wanted to tell you about my crispy rice. I never thought I'd be up here telling you my entire history of my 100 years of history here. And then woman life freedom was a huge shift in saying, no, we're done. And it couldn't have been louder than that. And I think what we want to do when we process all this information, while we look at Iran as a state, we have to remember the internal pressures because it is the most illegitimate state inside of Iran. And if we are not taking and putting that into the calculation of what's going to happen next, I don't think we have a complete picture of what is going to happen next, actually. Next slide, please. And this is all the power balances that are coming. I didn't realize Iran was this important. But it's really nice to see that everybody wants a piece of it. Not in the nicest way, I mean. But so here is just a great example of saying, if I told you the history about Russia and UK, while I appreciate that everybody thinks that the allies, the partnership is important, I think one thing that is missing in the dialogue is who has benefited from sustainability of the Islamic Republic of Iran? Who has benefited when we say we must deter a breakout of war? We must, deterrence is the word that people love using. Stability, whose stability are we really talking about? Is it the stability of Spain, who gets to come buy saffron at a super cheap price and go sell it at premium price and say it's a Spanish saffron and win and bring you comfort for gases because you don't want to pay $5 for a gas while people are starving and not getting food and not getting access because of the mismanagement of the Islamic Republic? So a big question for Iranians is, whose stability are we talking about? Your stability or humanity's stability? I think that morality conversation needs to be weaved into the thinking, all the dynamics happening at the same time. It's not a linear path. It's like, this is how I see the world happening. It's not like this. Okay, next slide. So I want to paint a picture with you with the power structure inside of Iran. Civil society, youth, opposition. The social base is the woman life freedom, the workers, the teachers, the hospitals, the physicians. Primary ambitions, liberty and freedom. You have the reformists and moderates, then the conservative political establishment, then the IRGC security establishment, then the supreme leader who's dead now, and inner circles of them. I know everybody says, oh, his son just lent out a, update. No one in Iran has seen him. They haven't even held a funeral for him or a formal process that happens. It's the 3rd, the 7th, and the 40th that you celebrate in our culture, Islamic culture, and no one has seen it. So a lot of people are asking, is he still alive or not? So what you want to think about is this bottom-up, all the way bottom-up power struggle. Let's go to the next slide. And this is what's happening. So you got the top that has been broken down. The IRGC and security, while everybody gives them way too much credit, in my humbled opinion, there is breakdowns happening in the IRGC. The IRGC was established to overcome the army of Iran. And the IRGC basically is a guard for the revolution of 1978. They're not a normal army. The army has been like depowered. And the the IRGC basically is controlled, they're monitored. They're never going to come out and say, yes, we're against the Islamic Republic, even if there's decent human beings in there. And you can't deny that some people signed up for it for, family ties, whatever it may be. So if they deflect, which is what Iranians are waiting to happen, what will happen to them afterwards? What is the security level happening to them? Will they get protection? Pretty much what happened in South Africa. Like, is there an opportunity to break away from that, or like World War II with Hitler and the soldiers that happened? So that fear is there. A lot of them are tangled up with a lot of money because near 50% of Iran's economy is absolutely controlled by the IRGC. If you make a few $1 million, they're knocking on your door. Give me some of your money. That's how it works. It's a very corrupt system. So when we talk about Iran and when we talk about a state, we have to understand this is not a normal state that you can negotiate with. It is not America. It is not Germany. It is not UK. Countries that have a foundational system grounded in your individual rights. And that is what Iranians are fighting for. And you can see the public, workers, students, women, lower middle class, ethnic minorities, it's a very united front right there. It's elevated further up. Now we have the youth, we have the labor strikes. This recent horrible protest that happened in January actually started in the bazaar. The bazaar was where the revolution of 1979 happened. People have turned this entire nation. The Gamma survey has said from 2024 that 70% to 80% of Iranians are against this regime. And it's not just against the regime. They want a new philosophy. They want to bring the continuation of the constitutional revolution. So now we're at the shaky part of IRGC, and the head is gone. So the issue is really what is going to happen to the IRGC. And I think people give it way more credit than they deserve. Because every time Iran has had some kind of a protest, the government contracts. They get very aggressive, and then they lean back. And then, again, protests. They contract, and then they lean back. And after woman life freedom, what happened is they were like, oh, yes, the hijab laws must go there. Go to Iran and see what, like, from lower economic areas where you'll find a lot more conservative folks there, or the farms, all the way to northern part of Tehran where the affluent people live. They've seen the world. They've traveled the world. There is no hijab wearing. I mean, some people, it is choice, but the laws are there. Iranians want to change the law and bring law and order into our society. And I think that is where we really need to pay attention to, and it just doesn't seem to be integrated in the conversations. And a lot of people tend to speak for Iranians, so I was like, I'm going to speak for Iranians. I'm an Iranian, and here I am. And again, thank you so much for coming and taking the time to be here. If it matters to you, imagine how much it matters to Iranians. And that's it.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction, quite a wind-up. Very good. I have a question for you. All right, so The United States is at war, depending on who you ask, or a special military operation, depending on who you ask. But weapons are being fired. They may be fired again. If you stop most Americans on the street and ask them, why are we doing this? They would struggle to give a coherent answer. Many public officials and those sitting in Congress would do the same. Okay? So let me pose this to you as three people who understand this area of the world very well. Let me construct a scenario. If you were today named as National Security Advisor at the White House, and the president was actually inclined to listen to your advice, what are the three top things you would suggest that he do immediately to bring this war to an end? Mona?
You're looking at me. That is such an unfair question. Well, I guess the first thing I would advise is the need to restore our partners and allies. That we are now really confronted with a challenge regarding Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, its nuclear ambitions, et cetera, that I don't think the U.S. and Israel alone are going to be able to effectively address. So step one is we have to repair the relationship with our allies and actually begin to work together, to include in the Gulf as well, by the way, to catalyze a way forward. The Gulf itself, I didn't speak about the Gulf in my remarks because I was worried about time, but the Gulf is they're living their nightmare scenario. By the Gulf, I mean the Arab Gulf, the Gulf, the GCC countries. Or Persian, however you want to say it. No, but I said the Arab countries. I'm speaking about Arab countries.
You can call the Gulf Persian.
Okay. Yes, the Persian Gulf. I didn't call it the Arab Gulf. I said the Arab countries in the Gulf, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. They are facing a nightmare scenario. And so they need to find a way to work through this together. And in fact, their instincts, unfortunately, are driving them apart. So I think the U.S. has an important role to play in catalyzing and bringing together both those countries in the region as well as globally. The second is, look, the key threat, as far as I can understand it, which drove us to the war to begin with, is Iran's nuclear ambitions. And I'm afraid that we're in a situation now in which we can either go back at Iran with military action. My view, it will not work. It will not bring Iran to the table. Rather, we need to actually engage in negotiations with respect to Iran's nuclear enrichment. That seemed to be starting, where we were setting a benchmark of 12 years of a freeze. They came back with 5 years. That somehow has gone by the wayside. But ironically, I actually think the most important challenge, the key existential challenge, i.e. Iran's nuclear ambitions, can be negotiated. That also includes its highly enriched uranium, of which there are 400 kilograms. There, too, I think there's a way forward. The part where I would throw my hands up and say I'm not sure what we do is what I ended my talk on, which is Iran's de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz. That is a new reality. And that's where I feel we are going to have to think long and hard about how to build resistance, both in the region itself as well as in global markets. We have to think about how to build resilience here at home, whether it's increasing our strategic petroleum reserve, whether it's actually pivoting back toward renewables and lessening our dependence on oil. And again, at the end of the day, this is a wicked challenge. This is a challenge that reminds me of the challenge with the Islamic State. I was working in government at that time. I think you were as well, Frank. And the way that we ended up territorially defeating ISIS was by building a coalition of over 80 countries. That's the kind of global coalition, in my view, that is going to be necessary to address the now strategic challenge we face with Iran and its de facto control over the Strait.
Right?
Thank you for that softball question. It's a little bit to get warmed up. Okay, so the three things that the president would listen to me on, and the first one is to actually lay out strategic objectives about what was attainable, what was suitable, what was feasible, what was acceptable, not only to, and I don't really just mean the electorate, although that is important to preserve power, but secondly, about what is in the national interest, what is in our national interest. And so we have often, we talk about our vital national interests, but it's a three-tier. There's vital interests, there are interests, and the reason why I can't even really remember what the other two is because we never say them. There are lower-end interests that are not at all that things we're going to fight for. There are middle-tier interests, but it's always vital national interests that really make the United States actually take action. Now, the thing about this is the military is not the only tool in the toolbox to be able to leverage, leverage influence or project power. And so that's the thing, this is the great thing about the United States is we talk about the instruments of national power as DIME, which is the diplomatic power, informational power, military power, and economic power. And within that, you have two of those that are hard power and two of those that are soft power, right? And you can guess that the military is a hard power and so is economics. And we've been doing a great thing with the sanctions. They've actually had quite a lot of impact. And I will just say this, though. For a while, sanctions were the go-to weapon of choice for a while, certainly through the Obama administration. But the problem with sanctions is they're very narrow. And we try to use that like a Swiss Army knife. You know, we try to apply it like it's both a dessert topping and floor wax. But when sanctions are applied correctly, they work well. Now, the soft power, diplomatic and informational. Now, diplomatic, I think, speaks for itself, but diplomacy takes a long time. Informational is soft power. It could be Hollywood movies to show our way of life in the United States, in America, in our history, and our commitment to democratic values. And, so that's the first thing. I think first is lay out the strategic objectives. Number two, this is the harder one. Because once you have that worked out, we need to decide if this is a war or a negotiation tactic. And so when you ask where the objectives of this were, like the solutions that have come out, or some of them are things like we're going to put troops in, we're going to dig up all the nuclear material, and we're going to send that somewhere else. That is not. But if you look at the press release put out by the White House on April 1st that went through all of March's, all the statements about our objectives through March, from Marco Rubio, from the president, from Secretary Hegseth, it was sort of a mixed bag. But the number one thing was not the prevention of a nuclear weapon, nor was it to retake or to confiscate all that material. Instead, it was about the ballistic missiles, the short-term ballistic missiles. It was about the danger to the region. There were a lot of other things, but never, number one, was nuclear material. So the one thing I would say is what fits into our national interest to go after, and if it requires putting troops on the ground, then that seems to be like a war. And I think that right now, I think Iran has the initiative in that they've proven that they don't need a navy. They have proven that they don't need a nuclear weapon right now to influence the world economy. And that is just by holding the Strait of Hormuz. And if we're serious about securing that, you're going to have to do something about either taking terrain inside, and I'm not advocating for this, but you'd have to somehow secure the area in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz to be able to do it, not just do it from the air. And I'm an airman, and I love air power. But air power only works insofar as to achieve a condition, okay? Now, the last thing, and if it's not, then we need to reassess what we're doing with it, because I think we need to assess our use of military force. And the last is, number 3 is consult with Congress. Take responsibility for what we want to achieve. Consult with Congress, and then we'll move on from there. And that's it.
Thank you. Every day I think if I was sitting in the strategy room, what I would say to Donald Trump. Trust me, I think about that all the time. I think I would say because of the pressures inside of Iran, they're not small, they're huge and big. In January, when the protests came out, the most conservative towns that my friends live in came out. It was incredible what people witnessed those 2 nights, January 8th and 9th. Unfortunately, they were faced with the most brutal retaliation. That is a sign of a crippling regime. I do not agree with sustaining what has completely failed for decades, which is we must keep stability. Again, stability for whom? Keep asking that question. There is another area that a lot of people are not talking about. It's what's happening in the Middle East. The Dubai, UAE, I don't know if anybody has gone to Dubai recently. And I think that is the future of Iran. I think Dubai is like the Vegas of the Middle East. So from a cultural perspective, I think the Arabic culture is beautiful, but it is incredible. You go there with women covered and women with G-string bikinis on the beach. That is the future of the Middle East, whether we want to accept it and allow it or not. Because Iran, with or without Donald Trump, is going to change itself, and many Iranians do believe that ultimately it needs to be the people that will topple this regime. So I think it is imperative to really center Iranians and their desires. And how would we do that? Right now, the internet is shut down. Global powers, if we want to bring alliances together, come together and get Iran internet access. Then you will know where the real pressures are happening. When a regime has control over how you speak, how you talk, I have messages that I can share, but you don't speak Persian to hear, only 2 people here will know it, that they literally are saying, we are willing to tolerate this from the farmers, from people, again, I said from across different levels of society, we're willing to tolerate this until it's over. So Iranians are ready to topple this regime, and they've showed up and they've shown it. So the world, if you want to build the alliances, get Europe to side with the United States of America, and instead of sympathizing with an oppressive regime and comparing Iran to ISIS, I completely disagree with that. It is a highly educated society. It is a society that has really fought and has shown up in 1979. I've seen it with my own eyes, where we absolutely have the readiness to be there and to build friendships with everybody in the region, from Iraq to Syria to Palestine to Israel. Right now, you go to universities where they have Israeli flags and US flags, people are walking around it. They put it in front of entryways of mosques. People are not putting their shoes on it, on these flags. Iranians are sick of this disease mentality, and the world needs to unite with them. Obama needs to get on a platform and say something about that. World peace is speaking world peace, is what I'm talking about. Sustaining this regime is not peace, if that's what everybody voted for here. To be a good leader, you have to make difficult decisions. You have to be okay with people not liking you. And I think that's okay.
Okay. I'm not sure the president will ask for Obama's help, but...
No.
No, I'm just saying,
separate. Sorry. That is true.
We need to take some questions from the audience.
I do need to clarify. First of all, like you, Azzie, I do absolutely distinguish between the Islamic Republic, the IRGC, and the Iranian people. Secondly, when I said ISIS, I'm not comparing Iran or the Iranian people to ISIS. Why I raised that example is it, as I said, the ISIS challenge was a wicked challenge. And the way that it was defeated was through a coalition. Mm-hmm. That was why I raised it. In the same way, the Islamic Republic, the IRGC, its de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz is a wicked challenge. And the best way to defeat that is by establishing and building a coalition, which we have not done. That's what I meant. I, in no way, shape, or form, was comparing the Iranian people to ISIS. Please, I do need to correct that, because that's not what I said.
I understand your position. I know that's not what you said, but there is a very casual conversation that happens in all the conversations that are being had out there. And the average person that's listening to this, while we may be able to make that distinction, isn't necessarily happening on the ground. And it is imperative that I say so, and it is imperative that I distinguish us every time that it comes up, because there is a difference. In fact, Islamic Republic of Iran had a campaign inside of Iran against ISIS as well. So that in itself is information that the Islamic Republic of Iran doesn't believe in that. They just believe in the Shia revolutionary ambitions that they have to export their ideology through their proxies in Lebanon, in Syria, in Palestine, which has completely created destabilization. If we're talking about stability, why are we not addressing that from that angle? And yes, I don't think he will go to Obama for an answer.
And I think we have some questions from the audience.
We certainly do, and thank you for all of your questions. I do just want to note for anybody maybe checking their watch, we're so thankful to all of this substantive conversation, and we want to make sure we do get to answer plenty of audience questions. So we just have asked to extend the program until 7:45 p.m., so please just be prepared for that. It's exciting to get live polling data that sort of informs us that Asia is a real area of interest for this audience, and the questions certainly reflected this. So my first question is, what impact does the panel see on the Xi-Trump summit on the situation in Iran?
Well, I don't think you're going to see an outcome on Iran in this summit. This is a trade summit. This is going to cover ground that has to do with trade policy, whether or not China will buy more American soybeans, et cetera. And I think that the side conversations that will occur regarding opening up the strait, whether whether China can use its influence with Iran. First, the president did say that earlier today or yesterday. I heard the soundbite that he doesn't think China can help. But I will tell you that from what I've read, not that I've met these people, but from what I've read is China has no interest to help the United States out here. So, if you're looking for a breakthrough on that, I don't think you'll see it. In fact, you see more cooperation with China and Iran on trading information, on intel, and it's questionable whether or not there's air defense military equipment being traded, being delivered to Iran. So I'll just be optimistic besides that.
I can go with that. So when I had expressed the global powers that have always tried to basically exploit Iran, China is one of them. China basically signed a 25-year deal with Iran, and through that deal, they found ways to navigate against the Western powers to basically. How do I want to say this? Basically, China said, we'll come to your side strategically. The name of this deal has like strategy alliances in it as well. I don't remember the name exactly. But basically what they want to do is say, we'll get cheap oil from you and we'll align with you. And that is precisely what's been happening. The Islamic Republic has been selling cheap oil, and they have found pathways to skip the sanctions in order to be able to keep this alliance with them. That is not an alliance you want to sustain, because ultimately you have to see what your fundamental values are for yourself. Is a great way to filter your thinking through it. You believe in liberty and freedom, first of all. Who do you want to be aligned with, second of all, and why? And so when you look at this event taking place in the next few days, I think it comes down to what is going to benefit China. I don't know. At the end of the day, China isn't in it to save Iranians, just like I don't think United States is in it to save Iranians. They are trying to get Iran to fall into the orbit of the West, which is what Iranians want as well. We want to be in the orbit of the West. And so China is looking at it as a transaction. This is a transaction deal they made with Iran, so it just depends what the counteroffer is that Trump is going to bring to the table. That I don't know. I'm thinking it's going to have something to do with the tariffs and all the stuff that's been going on in the last few years.
Can I jump 30 seconds on the end of that? So just let me tell you about the great conspiracy theory. So as we look at Venezuela and then we look at Iran, that the conspiracy theory is that this is a great grand strategy, that going after Venezuela and cutting off the oil takes, I think, 12% of the oil exports that went to China, and the other, I think, 15% of, or it's 17% of Iran's oil exports went to China. And so this is a way to sort of choke that off. I think that's a little conspiracy theory, but I think, in fact, it does affect China's consumption of oil, and they are primarily worried about that where they are economically, and as their military buildup requires a lot of resources. So I think they're worried about that.
Very insightful. I had no idea about that. And also with Iran, I think, Mona, you expressed earlier, what is the threshold of the Iranian pain, Islamic Republic's pain? I think that was an interesting take on it. Iranians have a high threshold for pain. However, the things you referenced about they don't know what to do with the oil, they don't know where to put it. I think it's more a matter of time, who can time it out further, and the stretching of the time is kind of really who can outlast it longer. And I'm saying, like, can they hang on for 4 or 5 more months? I don't know.
Can we get it before the midterms?
You have another question?
Probably.
Yes, another couple of questions. What will the result be in the region, what will the region look like if Iran is perceived to win the war? And then how hard will it be for the Iranian people to replace the current regime?
I'll take that one. I mean, I think, first of all, if Iran succeeds in maintaining its de facto control over the Strait, this is going to be an enormous challenge for not just the region, but globally. We're already seeing the very negative effects that this has had on the Gulf Arab countries in terms of their energy infrastructure, their GDP, very, very negative effects. Qatar, for example, has experienced a 15% contraction in its GDP. And that's going to have all kinds of knock-on effects as well. The Gulf countries have played a very important role, increasingly being key providers of humanitarian assistance, for example, investment. There's also the question of the sovereign wealth funds, which essentially is in the trillions of dollars. And so the question will be, if Iran maintains that ability to, in essence, hold the region and the world hostage by asserting its ability to disrupt traffic through the Strait, that is going to put the Middle East and, frankly, the broader global economy in a very, very difficult position. I'm not, again, I think the other point which I would have made is we also should think about what precedent is being set here. Because by Iran asserting its control over the Strait and seeking to, for example, charge tolls, which they have done, for ships seeking to pass through the Strait, that sets a very dangerous precedent globally. That means that the whole precept of freedom of navigation has been upended. And indeed, we've already seen examples of that. We've seen, for example, Indonesia musing about whether it should collect levies for ships seeking to pass through the Malacca Strait. Any one of these strategic choke points could now be vulnerable to the littoral powers that border those areas seeking control. And so I think this presents an enormous challenge. But as I said, I don't see the answer coming about easily. Azzie, unfortunately, I just don't, I wish it were true that it would be easy or possible in the near term for the Iranian people to rise up and depose the Islamic Republic. I think what we've seen with the assassination of the supreme leader, the decapitation of the regime, we've seen a much more IRGC-empowered regime in Iran. And I think that makes the potential for the Iranian people in the near term, or even into the medium term, to rise up and overthrow the regime, I think that's going to be quite difficult. And I think that's why we have the conundrum we have.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. Yeah.
We have some more audience questions.
Yeah, fact-checking time. This has been a great discussion, obviously, with a lot of good content. We fact-checked some of the specific factual assertions that were made and found them to be, very well supported. We also got a lot of great fact-check inquiries from the audience, so we appreciate that, and we kind of focused on those, and we'll try to just run through as many as we can here real quickly. I will say the common theme of our response to them, I'm a law professor. These are law students. There's kind of a joke that, like in law school, you learn that the answer to everything is it depends. Depends on what you mean by that question, depends who you ask, it depends. And that's kind of true for all these things. One question, this isn't so much even about Iran, but someone had a question about whether it's true that Washington, D.C. has more or less diversity of opinion than Kansas City does. So I thought that was interesting. I've lived in both places, and again, it kind of depends on what you mean. If you just walk around and talk to people who live in D.C., it is a very liberal city. I mean, it's pretty uniformly that way. But on the other hand, it's the nation's capital, and so it certainly has a strong contingent of conservative and libertarian and every other point of view through its think tanks and political institutions and that sort of thing. Kansas City, obviously, also a pretty liberal place in sort of a liberal island in a region that's largely conservative. Another question that I addressed was, has the bombing increased public support for the current regime in Iran? And I think you could say it's hard to say whether it's really significantly increased or decreased it. The sources seem to say it's complicated the situation. Early on, after the bombing last summer, as well as more recently, there was some evidence of a rally around the flag effect that Iranians thought, well, we don't like our country being attacked this way, and it might have generated some additional support for the regime. But on the other hand, there's tremendous anger and resentment about the damage that's been done to the country. So overall, it's probably hard to say whether it's gone one way or the other. Velimir and Myra will address a couple other things, including what's the most least popular war in U.S. history? Is this war fairly categorized as conventional or unconventional? Is the United States experiencing a shortage of missiles? So I'll turn it over to them.
Hey, good evening. My name is Velimir Stefanovic. I'm a 2L student at UMKC School of Law. At the beginning of tonight's event, we spoke about public support for this specific conflict in Iran. So we did a little bit of research and found out some organizations that do research regarding the public support, among which are Gallup, Harris, and Pew Research Center. They were stating that the support for the current conflict in Iran is starting at around 31% of the public support for this conflict. We compared those numbers to some other conflicts that were in the past. So for example, Vietnam War started with a support of 61% and ended up with a support of 28%. And then on our side, Iraq War started with 76% of the support of the public and ended up as low as 25%. With those numbers compared to the support for the Iran war, starting with 31% of the public support, we'll see where it will end up.
Hello, I'm Myra Milam. Thank you for all these incredible questions. One of the questions we received is the U.S.-Israeli war in Iran an extension of the Israeli war in Gaza and Israel's dispossession of Palestinian land in the West Bank? As Professor Rostron said, it depends. We'll defer to the experts here. So as you recall, Azzie's incredible visual of Iran as the geopolitical center, and also Colonel Klimas's argument that the two issues are distinct and that this was anticipated. We do find that they're highly interconnected. So an article from Reuters today indicated that Israel has increased its attacks on Gaza since the Iran truce, arguing that Hamas has been rearming. Another question that we got was about conventional versus unconventional war. So Israel's military strategy was described as conventional, yet Israel is currently committing a genocide in Palestine. They're also seizing land in Lebanon and committing war crimes. What about that is conventional? Great question. So according to the Modern War Institute, we find a conventional warfare described as state-on-state, non-nuclear conflict between uniformed professional military forces using mass firepower in an open space with the aim of destroying each other and gaining or holding power. Whereas an unconventional conflict is a violent struggle among state and non-state actors for legitimacy, influence, and other relevant forces among their populations. And then the final question that we received was regarding the military missiles and the stockpile. The question is there a critical shortage of missiles in the United States due to its aggressive military operation in the war? And so we found that, according to the Center for Strategic International Studies, on April 21st, the U.S. has fired 45% of its critical Patriot missile interceptors and over 53% of its THAAD interceptors. We've also found that the United States has fired over 45% of its precision strike missiles. However, the same report indicated that U.S. munitions are currently at acceptable inventory levels. Thank you all for your questions.
How are we on time? We're fine? Okay, good. I have a question that I would like to ask. Wars are teachable moments, or should be. And when we look at this one, what would you say are the three most important lessons that future presidents and the American public ought to learn from this war?
So let me just say one quick thing about the fact-checking, because I want to make sure that the way I framed Israel versus Iran is clear. What I said was that Israel is a conventional military power. So that refers to its air power, its sort of conventional military means. Iran, by contrast, I call an asymmetric power. It uses drones and missiles. It doesn't have a conventional air force. So if you stack up one against the other, the Israelis, in many ways, more powerful, but Iran able to use these other means in order to accomplish its military objectives. I was not referring to how wars are conducted. I'm simply referring to the type of power. In terms of your question, and these are hard questions to reflect upon, but I think for me, lessons learned, one, go into any sort of military intervention with a very clear strategy, with clearly defined objectives, and with the support of the American people, making the case to the American people as to why it's important. Second, know your adversary. Understand who your adversary is and how they will react. And there's been quite a lot of work done on the Islamic Republic, which has been in power for 47 years. And it appears many of those lessons have not been absorbed in the conduct of this war. And the third lesson is to understand the unintended consequences of war. We went into this war on February 27th, the night before we went into the war. Iran had never sought to take control successfully of the Strait of Hormuz. We now, as a result of this war, have a new problem, which is its de facto control over the strait. We have also seen enormous repercussions around the globe, and we are, as I said at the outset, we are 75 days into this. And the longer this goes on, the more acute these impacts will be. And this war, because of its economic impacts, has a very long tail. So that even if the fighting stops tomorrow, we will unfortunately experience the effects of this war for some months to come, and in the case of some instances, years. Thank you.
Okay, here's three things I think we learned. Great question, by the way. So, first, the United States has a bad track record of regime change. So, real quick, just to get after that, from what our ombudsman's over there provided for us. Let's talk about regime change for 1 second, and that is that regime change hasn't happened. So when you change a regime, you change the entire system of government, not the people in it. Otherwise, we would change the regime every 4 years here, right? So our regime in the United States is the Constitution. The regime in the Islamic Republic of Iran is the IRGC and the Supreme Leader. Okay, and I would say that what we've done is if you want another conspiracy, that the IRGC, in a way, somehow, what if we found out the IRGC convinced Israel to actually strike the leadership, the civilian leadership, and take out the Supreme Leader so the IRGC could be in control? Because effectively, that's what's going on right now, is the IRGC is running everything. The way the Iranian government operates is like a deep state. So you can take pieces of it out, and it will still function. Now, the way the government operates is very incompetent. It doesn't do well. It can't get water into Tehran. Farmers struggle, et cetera. And so to get to actually change the regime, here's a couple of lessons. That if you remember the Arab Spring from 2011, the reason why Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood won that election is because in Egypt, that there were no political parties there. In fact, Muslim Brotherhood was illegal as well. But they're the only political party that actually had a ground game. So if you wanted to get any kind of regime change, what you need to do is, and this is really where I think the president could score some big points, is cultivate what's going to come next. Don't just leave it to chance, because you might not like what comes next. I know that President Bush in 2006 didn't like that Hamas won the elections in Gaza, and he certainly didn't like it. We didn't like the outcome. President Obama didn't like the outcome in Egypt. So I think we have an opportunity to work with the regional partners, and I don't just mean the Gulf states, but I do mean the partners in the region. Work with them to bring what the next government can look like in Iran based on what the people want to do, just to support that. I think because they're definitely in a tough place. The number two thing we've learned is that strong powers have trouble defeating weak powers in the modern age. And the reason why is we get lazy. We got modern weapons. We don't really commit to war. We don't really plan well for it. We don't plan to fail. Instead, we have frozen conflicts, and we have unsure outcomes. So I think that that's what I've learned, and as evidence, and I'm not just pulling this, as evidenced by Russia and Ukraine. That's another one. And then number three is great power competition is not better than the Cold War. So do your homework, and of course, the corollary to that is eat your vegetables. So.
Right. Azzie.
Wonderful. So my three lessons before setting it up, I want to share that the Strait of Hormuz isn't something that Iran just sparked up on. And they're like, oh, we have power. This regime is actually a smart regime. They have controlled Iran and the region for 47 years. So I think this is where, if you want to build a coalition on a global level, you must decide, is it great to continue existing with such a regime in the region, while we know war has a lot of bad things that comes with it. I think we should practice moral humility instead of moral posturing when it comes to war. Because when you keep a regime like this, for exactly the reasons we're witnessing today, what happened in January, the chaos it has created in the Strait of Hormuz, I think the question we all need to ask is, if we prolong their existence, do we really think this is not going to happen again? The time has arrived that this regime must go. And we talk about regime change. 80% of Iranians want a fundamental regime change. So it is not America changing the regime. It is first and most importantly, Iranians that want to change the regime. They want a secular society. And it is quite dumbfounding why no Europeans want to stand by that. And they keep talking about the Islamic Republic as a state, as a rational, pragmatic. There is nothing rational or pragmatic. And if these 5 points that they came back with, one of them being that you need to pay for the damages that were caused in Iran, they're spending $14,000 for Hezbollah, who got involved with the war in Gaza to rebuild their lives. $14,000 per person to save them, but yet they ask Iranians to be rational about the damages caused to civilian lives here. So what are the lessons for me with that setup is that sympathizing, I see this, I work in the field of oncology. I think when you look at this like a cancer, do you address the cancer or do you just work with it with holistic treatments around it? Do you allow it to grow and grow and then you attack it with chemotherapy and then you see all these side effects? You got to address this should have been addressed decades ago. And for the longest time, Iranians would sit around in our circles and say, America and the West are benefiting from this regime, because if you actually know World War I, what led to World War II, and then the Cold War, building a religious belt really was beneficial for the West. So now you have a new generation that is growing up in the Middle East, in Iran, in Israel, in Palestine, in Syria. These are educated people. They see and they know what they want and they know what they deserve. So first lesson that I learned was, do not walk or sympathize with a regime that kills its own people. There's no negotiation there. That's one.
Azzie, if I may interrupt you, I'm getting the signal that we need to wind this up. That's a great first lesson. I agree. But we have a custom at American Public Square. This is a very informed audience, some of the best you'll find in Kansas City. And we always leave them with words for the road. So I would like to ask each of the panelists briefly to answer these two questions for the good folks at home. So what? Now what?
I always have to answer these difficult questions first. Look, so what? I think what we are understanding with this conflict that continues to unravel is a bigger question. In my view, as I said in my remarks, the Middle East is what I call a hinge moment, a moment of an interregnum between an old order and a new order. What I worry is that the new order that we are seeing emerge in the Middle East is one of disorder, is one of a lack of red lines, a lack of guardrails. It's one in which we see brutal regimes remaining in control, but also one in which we see wars being fought at will. And my concern or my question that I'm going to be watching is what we are watching in the Middle East, the leading edge of broader global disorder, as we see the international rules-based order that had pertained for 80 years since the end of World War II eroding.
Okay, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, Ford for a short bit, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, and Trump accepted a mantle of responsibility to lead the world. And that was not by voters, that was by the grace and wealth that the United States, the grace they had received and the wealth that they had obtained. And being the winners after World War II gave us a lot. And so the so what is, we've had a place in the world. Sometimes we don't want to do it. But if we don't do it, you create space for someone to get in there. And right now, if we're talking about this, the so what of the Middle East is the United States cannot take themselves out of the Middle East to be the security provider and provide leadership in the world. And so now what is to assess that relationship, because I think a world without the United States as a leader is more chaotic, is more unstable, is more, I would say, a little dystopic. And I think that the world I grew up in, that understood that we had values. Rather than impose our values, we live our values and show them as an example. And I would like that to be our now what.
Azzie.
I like that. I think that's actually very good. Do we want the U.S. to be the global leader, and do we want to step out of the Middle East? I assure you, a lot of people want the U.S. and everybody out of the Middle East to allow them to get to the next level of their lives. But you also need a culture in the Middle East that's ready for it. You also need a society that's ready for it, that understands the basic fundamentals of what it means to establish a government with check and balances. Those basic educational aspects haven't grown, but we need to be free to be able to do that. People have already done that on their own. Imagine when it's free, what's going to happen. So the so what for me is, do you want a world where everybody has the right to individual rights? Or do you want a world where we just say, hi, China, hi, Russia, we want to sustain this relationship, but, oh, Islamic Republic is doing this. In order to create stability, you almost need to allow chaos to happen. It's kind of like facing the dark shadow. I don't know if anybody does like personal healing work, but when you do your healing work, you crumble first, and then you arrive. And I kind of see the world, what's happening today is exactly that. So that's my so what.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panel. And thank you all for coming. Have a safe journey home.